Good morning. Got to turn it on first. Turn to Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2. We'll finish up our study of Daniel chapter 2, and then we'll move into Daniel chapter 3 if we get that far. I want to we're toward the end of the chapter. I want to very quickly bring us up to date. Daniel chapter 2 is the story of Nebuchadnezzar's dream that he had forgotten, could not remember. Had the wise men and astrologers came in, they said, we can't do that because we have to know the dream first. And then Daniel intervened, and Daniel was able to tell him the dream. There was a head of gold, a breast and arms of silver, a belly of brass or bronze, and legs of iron, the feet of iron mixed with clay. And Daniel said, this is the interpretation. You're the head of gold. Babylon is the head of gold. Next will be a second kingdom represented by the breast and arms of silver, which is the Medo-Persian Empire. Next will be a third kingdom represented by the belly and thighs of brass. That will be the Grecian Empire. And after that will be the legs of iron and the feet of iron mixed with clay, and that will be the Roman Empire. And that's where we were when we ended up stopping last week. In verse 44, the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw, the stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand. It broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain and its interpretation. And so the whole point of this vision, this dream that Nebuchadnezzar saw, is to point out the coming of the Messianic kingdom. He starts verse 44 as in the days of those kings. And it's probably in reference to in the days of the kings of the Roman Empire. Because that's just what had been talking about in the previous verse, the fourth kingdom, the legs of iron, the feet of iron mixed with clay, the days of those kings, the days of the kings of the Roman Empire. There are some who think it's a reference to all four of them together in the days of the time of these four kingdoms. I'm not so sure that fits the context. So it seems to me he's talking about the days of the Roman king. The God of heaven shall set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall kingdom be left to another people. One of the things that's very interesting when you begin looking at it, the Babylonian Empire was an empire of itself. The Medo-Persian Empire took over. They took over the Babylonian land. And so the Babylonian kingdom was left to another people. The Medo-Persians took it. When the Medo-Persian Empire ended, the Greeks took it over. And even though they added land to it, they took over what the Medo-Persian Empire was. And so it was left to another people. The same thing happened with the Roman Empire. It took over what was left of the Grecian Empire and then added to it until the Medo-Persian Empire was left, Greek Empire was left to another people. God said, or Daniel said, God said, this kingdom is not going to be destroyed. It's going to continue to last forever, and it shall not be left to another people. It's always going to be God's kingdom. It's always going to be ruled by God. Now, not only does he say that, he says in the latter part of the verse, it shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them down to an end, and it shall stand forever. You remember the stone came out of the mountain, it broke the legs and the feet of the image. The image just collapsed. It busted up, and the Bible says in Daniel 2 there was not even enough powder left to be blown away. It was completely destroyed and gone. And when you think about it, the Babylonian Empire was absorbed by the Medo-Persian Empire. The Medo-Persian Empire was absorbed by the Grecian Empire. The Grecian Empire was absorbed by the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire was destroyed by God. The Roman Empire decided that they wanted to go into a battle against Christianity. There was a Roman emperor in about 290 to 295 whose name was Diocletian. Diocletian made a decree that Christianity was illegal. All church buildings were to be taken, seized. All copies of Scripture were to be destroyed. If you called yourself a Christian, you would be executed. Very interesting. That was in the 290s. In about 313, a Roman emperor by the name of Constantine legalized Christianity. It's now legal to be a Christian. 325, 12 years later, Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. Now, in some ways, that was a good thing, but in other ways, it was a bad thing, because then Christianity became mixed in with the Roman government. And anytime you got the government running the church, you got problems. We don't need government running the church. We don't need the government telling the church what to do. God's people are guided by God's law. I'm gracious, I'm happy, I'm blessed that we're living in a country where we're free to worship as we want to worship. I don't want the federal government forcing people to be Christian. I don't want Christianity to be the state religion. Because when you do that, you're not getting politics and the church conglomerated and messed up, and you have all kinds of problems. The church and government, political power, need to be completely separate. When Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, he assumed the position of being the leader of the church. He started issuing all kinds of decrees. The first church conference that was held that produced an Nicene Creed was called by Constantine. And so you ended up with, the church was now legal. You didn't have to worry about being physically persecuted or thrown in jail or murdered. But now the church is being compromised by its mixing with the government. And so it says, "It shall stand forever, just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand." That is, humans were not involved in this process. Even though God decreed it to be done, Nebuchadnezzar and his father Nabopolassar built the Babylonian Empire. Cyrus built the Medo-Persian Empire. Alexander the Great built the Grecian Empire. The Roman generals built the Roman Empire. None of those people and no man at all had anything to do with God's kingdom. God did it. It was constructed, it was completed, it was finished, it was done by God. And that's what the purpose of that stone being cut out of the mountain with no hands. No human hands. No humans were involved. Now, it's true we're a part of it, but we weren't the cause of it being made. It broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. When all of those empires were assumed in the Roman Empire, and then the Roman Empire was crushed, that means all four of those empires are gone. Whatever was left of those empires that were held within the Roman Empire, when it was gone, they're all gone. And that's why the entire image, it wasn't just the legs and the feet that were broken, it was the whole image. It was the entire thing. It was completely gone. And I don't know, maybe Britain came the closest, I don't know that since then there has ever been in the last 2,000 years what we could call a world empire. I mean, Britain ruled a lot of part of the world, but there was also France, there was also Spain, there was also, after late 1700s, the United States. I don't know that we've had what we could call that was similar to Rome or Greece or Medo-Persia, where they ruled pretty much the entire known world under one iron fist. I don't know that that's happened again. A great God, that is Jehovah, has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain and its interpretation sure. Now this dream was given to Nebuchadnezzar. Its intent was that it be spread because it was written down in the Hebrew Scriptures. The Jews would know it because it's in their Bible. And so it was not just a private message for Nebuchadnezzar. It was a message for Nebuchadnezzar that was to become public, so that everybody would know. And when you go back to Daniel chapter 2 and you understand the dream and the vision, you see a perfect picture of when the kingdom of God was going to come. When you're going to talk about the establishment of the kingdom and the establishment of the church, you need an understanding of Daniel 2 to get there. That's the best Old Testament prophecy I know of, to talk about the establishment of the church when it occurred, except maybe for Daniel 7. We'll get that in a little bit. And so Daniel 2 is a kind of a important chapter. And it kind of lays the groundwork for all of the other visions that occur in the book of Daniel. Does anyone have a question or comment on anything in chapter 2? The end of it says, Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face, paid homage to Daniel, commanded offering incense to be offered up to him. There's some people who make a question here about him paying homage to Daniel. That is, he worshiped Daniel, he offered homage to Daniel. Daniel should not have accepted that. We don't know whether Daniel did or not. Nothing said. I think we can assume that Daniel did not. If Daniel wasn't going to eat food that was a violation of the law, Daniel wasn't going to accept worship. This is recorded from Nebuchadnezzar's viewpoint, and it may well be the very next verse he talks about God. It may be Daniel or Nebuchadnezzar was offering worship and praise to God through Daniel, because he refers to the king answered and said to Daniel, "Truly your God is God of gods and Lord of lords and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery." Nebuchadnezzar does not at this point accept the fact there's only one God. Daniel is a God of gods. There are a lot of gods out there. Daniel's or God. Jehovah may be one of them. In fact, he may be one of the best ones, but he's not the only one. Nebuchadnezzar continues to be a pagan, polytheistic individual. We're going to see that in the next chapter. But he understands the power of God. He understands Daniel worships God. But he continues to refer to God as Daniel's God. Not my God. This is not me. I'm talking about Daniel's God. He's a great God. But he doesn't give up his belief in his gods. The king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained at the king's court. Daniel was active for pretty much the entire Babylonian captivity, and even a little bit past that. In Daniel chapter 8, we are told that Daniel made a prophecy in the 3rd year of Cyrus's reign. Cyrus was a Medo-Persian king who replaced the Babylonians. And so if you figure Daniel was taken when he was about 14 or 15, and he prophesied till he was at least, for 70 years, that's 84, 85, 86, he's an old man by the time he passes off the scene, and we don't really know when he died. All that's mentioned, the last date that's mentioned, is he made a prophecy in the 3rd year of Cyrus's reign. Whether he died in that year or died another year later, 5 years later, 10 years, I don't know. The Bible doesn't record it. But he was a prophet. He was a man of God for over 70 years. And the important thing about that to me is he was a prophet in the court of the emperor. He was connected to the empire. He was connected to the rulers. He had an impact upon several of the Babylonian kings, Nebuchadnezzar specifically. And so God had him there for a reason. If you remember, there were 3 prophets who were all prophesying at the same time. They were all 3 in different places. Daniel was in the court of the king. Ezekiel was at the river Kibar with those who had been taken captive by the Babylonians. And Jeremiah was still in Jerusalem. They were all 3 contemporary with one another for a period of time. And so God did that for a reason. If you look at those four empires there, the Bible talks about the fact that Christ came in the fullness of time. Galatians points that out. You look at those empires, they all made contributions that made the first century the perfect time for the coming of Christ. It was the fullness of time. Number one, the Babylonian Empire produced synagogues. When the Jews were kicked out of Jerusalem and set off into Babylonian captivity, they had to have somewhere to worship. And so they worshipped in synagogues. They did not offer animal sacrifices because animal sacrifices could only be offered at the temple, only be offered in Jerusalem. But they did have worship services in synagogues. And if you remember, in the first century, Jesus did a lot of his teaching in synagogues. Paul and the other apostles did a lot of preaching in synagogues. A lot of the preaching of the gospel in the first century was done in synagogues, which were produced as a result of the Babylonian Empire. Number two, the Medo-Persian Empire was the first empire to place a great importance on the principle of law and order. Up till that point, every empire, the emperor, had been above the law. If Nebuchadnezzar didn't like the law, he ignored it. If he didn't like the law, he rewrote it because he was the emperor. He could do anything he wanted to. In the Medo-Persian Empire, several times in Scriptures talked about the fact that the law of the Medes and the Persians changeth not. If the emperor didn't like the law, it didn't matter. He had to obey it just like everybody else did. In Daniel chapter 6, remember when Daniel was thrown in the lion's den, the specific passage is mentioned. You made this decree. You got to enforce it. And so Medo-Persia was the first place where the law was in a higher position than the ruler was. Before that, it had been the other way around. Now the ruler makes the law. Once he makes the law, he has to submit to it just like everybody else does. Thirdly, you had the Grecian Empire. The Grecian Empire's contribution was very simple. It was the Greek language. By the time the first century rolled around, and for a couple hundred years before that, the almost nigh universal language in the world was Greek. Almost all government activities, commercial activities, trading, selling, almost all of that was done in Greek. Now it's true. The Hebrews, the Jews in Jerusalem still spoke Aramaic. The Italians still spoke Italian. The Turkish people spoke whatever language. As far as the official language that government was conducted in and business was conducted in, and all, it was Greek. Because almost everybody knew Greek. And that made it simpler when the gospel began to be preached, because they could preach it to most of the people in the world in one language, Greek. And then the fourth one, the Roman Empire contributed roads and great methods of transportation. The Roman army spent a great deal of time building roads because they needed those roads to travel on. An interesting thing is many of those roads still exist. They are still being used. You know, we got all these modern day methods of construction. We build a road and we're lucky if it lasts 10 years. Theirs lasted 2,000. Well, so they didn't have the heavy equipment we have running on them. They didn't have automobiles and cars and big trucks and all that kind of stuff. But they built their roads to last. And that made it easier when the gospel began to be preached for the gospel to be spread, because you had an easy method of transportation. You also had easy transportation because you could go from one country to another because they were all under Grecian Roman rule.
What do you make of, in verse 43, they will mingle with the seed of men?
We mentioned a couple of weeks ago, the Roman Empire never became the country of Rome. The Jews remained Jews. The Italians remained Italians. The Ethiopians remained Ethiopians. In most cases, they were allowed to rule themselves. The king, Judah had a king. His name was Herod. Galilee had a king. His name was Herod Philip. And so each province remained its own province, and there never was really a unifying factor that brought them together. And so there was an inherent disunity in that, and they kind of intermingled with other nations and with other countries, and they intermarried, and they never did really unify in the sense that it would hold them together. What held them together for the time the Roman Empire stayed together was the power of the Roman army. It was one of the, if not the most powerful military force that has ever been created for its time. Now I realize they didn't have the modern day weapons that we have today. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about for their time. The Roman army was feared everywhere it went. And that's what kept them together. There wasn't a great pride. Let me give you an example. The United States has 50 states. I'm from Georgia. I'm proud to be a Georgia boy. Most importantly, I am an American. We have a bond that holds us together, that unites us as a people. Whether we are Americans or from Georgia or Arkansas or Texas or Oklahoma or Illinois, it's supposed to be whether we're Italian or Hebrew or German or Dutch or whatever, we're supposed to all come together. We call it a melting pot and form one country that is united. Rome never did that. They never did that.
That's still true today of the United States.
I think it's probably less true than it has been in the past. Now, that's my opinion. I'm going to give you my opinion because you asked me. That's my opinion. I don't like, and I understand the purpose behind it, but I don't like all these people. And I'm a Mexican American. I'm a Italian American. I'm a German American. No, I'm an American. I know where my family came from. I know what my ethnic background is. But in reality, I don't really care.
There are some cities where there are what is known as no-go zones, where if you're American, you're not welcome.
And I'm going to say this, I'm going to quit. I'm not going into deep philosophical or political discussion here. My allegiance is not to the country my grandparents were born in. My allegiance is to my country, which is here. This is all I've ever known. And all I want to know.
I think as Christians, my allegiance is to Christ.
Well, my ultimate allegiance is to God. I understand that. My earthly allegiance, as far as who I'm going to be a part of, is I'm an American.
Basically, what Paul said in Romans 13, we're to ornament bond.
Submit to the government under which you live. You need to remember this. Paul did not write that in a democracy. Paul didn't write that about a government he agreed with. It was based on Christian principles. Paul wrote that about a pagan, heathenistic empire. And he said to those people, you submit to that government because God put it there.
Yeah. And the point I was trying to make is there's a difference between commitment to, and allegiance is one thing, and submitting is another thing.
Yeah.
We can submit without allegiance.
Well, I think, and this is going to be my opinion again, I think I can have allegiance to my country and allegiance to God at the same time.
That's what Paul said.
I've said it a number of times, I'm very proud to be an American. I'm very proud of where I came from. I'm proud to be from Georgia. I'm proud of my family background. And so I don't apologize for any of that. My ultimate allegiance, my ultimate responsibility is to God. And when this government tells me to do something God says I can't, I got to make a choice. Yeah.
represented the Pizza Catholic Church alone.
I'm assuming it had to do with, number one, had to do with his wisdom and ability as a counselor. Number two, it had to do with God. God had something to do with him being there in the first place. Oftentimes in those situations when the Medo-Persian Empire took over Babylon, they would find some of those Babylonian counselors and advisors who knew about the Babylonian government and how it worked and what that country was about, and they would bring them into their government because that would provide them some wisdom about what they were going to be doing. And that's how Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego ended up in Babylon in the first place. Because Nebuchadnezzar wanted some people from Jerusalem who would represent Jerusalem in his administration. Anyone else? Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is probably the most famous passage in the book of Daniel. If you went to Bible school when you were a kid, you studied Daniel chapter 3. You may have studied in a Bible class lesson. You might not have actually looked at the actual scripture, but you've heard this story. We're all familiar, if we've been to church very much at all, with the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There are a couple of things that are interesting to me before we begin the chapter. Is the first thing that's interesting, and I don't have the answer to this, is where was Daniel? When this decree was issued and they were supposed to worship an idol God, and these three were not, where was Daniel? I don't have any idea. Maybe he was off on some foreign trip somewhere. Nebuchadnezzar was anything, I don't know. I have no doubt that Daniel would not have bowed down to this idol. The second thing I wonder is, and I may have mentioned this before, why is it in the book of Daniel that Daniel was referred to as his Jewish name, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are referred to by their Babylonian names? Daniel's name was changed too. Daniel's name was changed to Belteshazzar. Go back to Daniel chapter 1. Daniel means God is my judge. Belteshazzar means Bel protects his life. But throughout the book, Daniel is called Daniel. And after chapter 1, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I have no idea why. It's interesting to me. Some of those things sometimes just, and I know I can't find an answer, and I know it doesn't really matter. It's not really important. It's just curious to me. Chapter 3, verse 1 says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now this image of gold that he talks about, in all likelihood, was an image that the frame of it was built out of wood. And then it was overlaid with gold. That's the way almost all idols that were made. They were not made out of solid gold. I mean, if you think about this for a moment, it was 60 cubits high. How high is 60 cubits? 90 feet. How wide is 6 cubits? 9 feet. 90 feet is about the same as a 9-story building. Can you imagine having a chunk of gold that is that big? 90 feet by 9 feet wide? So the probability is that it was built out of wood, and then it was they melted gold and kind of poured it on it, and it was overlaid with gold. 90 feet high, 9 feet wide. It was on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. The best guess I can come with is that Dura is about 10 or 12 miles south of the city itself. Nebuchadnezzar built this image to honor himself and to honor his God. One of the things we've talked about before is heathenistic, polytheistic people like Nebuchadnezzar did not have any problem with introducing another God. We got 50 gods, we can have 51. We got 51, we can have 52. We got 52, it doesn't matter. You remember in Acts chapter 17 when Paul was standing at Mars Hill, and he talked about the fact there was an altar to an unknown God? The people in Athens were so afraid they left a God out, they didn't know that they built a god and called it the altar to the unknown God, the God that we don't know, the God that we haven't heard about. And so polytheistic viewpoint is totally different than ours. We come from a monotheistic view. This is all I've ever known. One God. To add another God to that would be blasphemous. It'd be unscriptural. It'd be wrong. Polytheistic people don't look at it that way. They believe in a plurality of gods. You can have all the gods you want. You can have thousands if you want them. And they didn't have a problem with accepting that God existed some other place. The Grecians would accept the Roman gods. The Babylonians accepted that Jehovah was a god, just not the God. The Medo-Persians accepted Jehovah was a god, not the God. They didn't have a problem with more gods. That was not an issue for them. And Nebuchadnezzar constructed this altar, and he said he sent together the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, there are actually differences in all those names that are mentioned there. And if you're interested in finding out what they were, they're on the screen. I've also got them on this paper that I printed out if you want a copy of it. And I'm not going to go into all of that. They were all governmental officials. They were kind of in a chain of authority, I guess you could say. The satraps were right up next to the emperor. But you've also got included now, notice you've got counselors who are advisors to the king, treasurers, they were the financial people, justice, they were the law people, or what you and I would consider policemen and judges. They were the ones who enforced the law. And officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image, and King Nebuchadnezzar, he set up this image, he built it, he had it constructed, he had it set up, and he said, now I'm going to dedicate it. And I'm going to make a big show out of this. I'm going to make a big production. It was both a religious production and a political production. One of Nebuchadnezzar's reasons, I think, for building this image was an attempt to unify the empire through religion. If they all worship the same image, what they're supposed to do, they're supposed to worship this image. If they all worship the same image, they're more likely to find themselves connected. It was also a religion. We need to understand Nebuchadnezzar was a very religious man. He believed in gods. I mean, not the religion that you and I practice. He was a very religious man. He was also very aggressive and very ruthless and very superstitious. But he was a religious man. He placed importance on his religious beliefs, and his main god was a god by the name of Marduk, who was the god of the Babylonians. And so he constructed this thing. He had all these people come and to the image. Verse 4, the herald proclaimed aloud. What's a herald? Announcer. A lot of places refer to him as town crier. They didn't have that, the president couldn't go on television and have a news conference. So this is the way they made announcements. Herald proclaimed, you are commanded, O people, nations, and languages, in other words, everybody, that when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. You notice that it mentions stringed instruments. It also mentions winged instruments, all kinds of wind instruments, all kinds of instruments. When they heard that music, they were to fall down and worship the image. Whoever does not fall down to worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. Now, when I think of the word furnace, I think of that thing that sits in my house, that heats my house. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about it. They're very large. It's kind of almost like Coke bottle shape. Big round bottom, and the top of it kind of went in, and at the top, it was open. And if they were going to burn metal or make bricks or whatever it was they were putting in there, they would put in from the top. They would drop it in. At the very bottom of that furnace, on one side of it, there was a small door that was open where they put in the fuel. Whether it was wood or charcoal or whatever it was they used, to produce the fire. That's where the fuel went in, was at the bottom. And there was already, this furnace was not built specifically for this purpose. There were already furnaces in Babylon. Because their major way of constructing buildings in that day and age was bricks. Most of their buildings were built out of brick. So they were always making brick. They were always refining metal. They were always melting metal for their construction, for their building, for their government. Right? So they had furnaces there, and there was one already there. In fact, there may probably have been one very close to where this image was. And some have suggested that furnace may have been pointed out. Whether it was or not, I don't know. Be thrown in the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of instrument, and every kind of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Everything went exactly according to plan, right? Everybody did what they were supposed to do. Keep reading. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. And I don't believe Nebuchadnezzar was trying to trap the Jews when he built this image. I think Nebuchadnezzar was so overwhelmed with his own ego and his own pride and his own arrogance that he was going to build that image anyway. However, the Chaldeans took that as an opportunity. The Chaldeans, you remember, are amongst those in chapter 1 who are referred to as the wise men of Israel, the astrologers, the enchanters, the Chaldeans. They were the educated men of their age. They didn't like the fact that these Jews were now in charge of them. And so they maliciously accused the Jews. They had a hidden motive. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever." What's the first thing they do when they go talk to the king? They butter him up. They flatter him a little bit. Get him feeling good so he'll listen to us. We don't do that, do we? You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship the image shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. They thought they had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They thought, you're out of the way now. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. King, we want to tell you about these rabble-rousers, about these troublemakers. You made this decree. Everybody's going to fall and worship this image. These guys didn't do it. And they got in a little bit of a hidden jab, I think, to Nebuchadnezzar. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you appointed. Really, behind, kind of in a sideways way, they're saying, Nebuchadnezzar, this is your fault. You did this. You put these guys in office. They don't pay attention to you. They don't listen to your command. They don't worship your gods. They're not worshipers of Marduk or any of the gods. Notice they said gods, plural. And they did not worship the golden image that you have set up. Three distinct charges they make against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And verse 13, then we'll quit. I know the bell just rang. Nebuchadnezzar in furious rage. Why was Nebuchadnezzar furious? What made him furious?
He was not being respected.
His own ego. His own sense of arrogance and self-importance. I gave this command and they had the audacity to ignore it. They didn't do what I told them to do, and I put them in the position that they got. I'm the one that made them powerful. I'm the one that gave them that job. And they're going to rebel against me? This ain't happening. You can just hear the rage. And he goes on to, he brought them in and he asked them, is this really true? Now you got to give Nebuchadnezzar some credit. He didn't throw them in the fiery furnace based on what somebody else said. He brought them in, and he gave them the opportunity to defend themselves. Did you really do this? And he also said, if you will now fall down and worship my image, this will all be forgotten. Have a little time this week, read the rest of chapter 3, especially Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's answer to Nebuchadnezzar. We'll begin looking at that next Sunday morning. What's your comment? Okay. Could be. Could not be. I don't know. There are a lot of people who believe it is. Most people believe it is, but they believe it's a reference to the Antichrist. And my view of the Antichrist and the world's view of the Antichrist are two different things.